I'm muted! Ah! Well, that's a good start. Fantastic. I was so excited. Don't worry about it. I didn't say anything important. I was turning down music. You could say the music was too loud. Hi, welcome to Tea Time with Teawrex. I am with my good friend, Joe Blackburn. Before we get started, I need to set the ground rules for y'all a little bit. So if this is your first time watching, it is typically a game development centric podcast. I know a lot of you are going to be here wanting to talk specifically about Destiny. I'm sure Destiny is going to come up today because that is something that we all have. Joe has done a lot with Destiny. It's going to come up. But if you are here specifically to learn about like Witch Queen or new details about things you don't know about, that isn't really the subject matter of this podcast. I love you to death. I'm very happy you're here. I just want to make sure you don't get mad at me if we don't cover something that you find to be super duper important. Because, like I said, this is a game development podcast. I want to learn from Joe the work he's done, the work that goes into making a game like Destiny or working with large companies and stuff like that. Just so we're all clear. Now that that's out of the way, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Joe?
Hey everybody, I'm Joe Blackburn. I'm the game director on Destiny 2. It's the shortest intro I can give, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So just as a, quick, I guess, intro to yourself, what else have you worked on? Like, where did you start as a game developer before you arrived as the director of Destiny 2?
Sure, so I'll give the roundabout, hey, how did you get into game development spiel here. So I'm an English major, and I started in game development long enough ago that was still a path that you could take to get into game design. I really loved MMOs in college and didn't know how to get into that field. I thought I was going to be a detective. I thought I was going to go to law school and be a detective.
You have the mustache.
Yeah. And then I just played so much World of Warcraft at the time. I was like, maybe there's a way to get into this. I talked to some people and they were like, well, if you can get in embedded QA, which is like a tester that's on the team, and they're like, that's a great way to get into, game development. And so sort of put some feelers out, and I was lucky enough to land a gig working at ZeniMax Online. They made Elder Scrolls Online, and so I got to work on that game pretty early in development as a embedded tester on their raids and dungeons team. And yeah, from there, just started making stuff in the tools, before, after work. We also had to use the tools a lot just to test new stuff, so I got pretty good at making stuff in the engine. Opportunity came along to move into design from there, so I started doing some boss design for Elder Scrolls Online. Learned so much about a game that's early in development and really learning what it is and going through a bunch of leadership changes and refining, what gives a game its identity. And then after ship, I did a little bit of work on their gameplay, their core ability design on ESO. And then was like, okay, I'm sort of looking for a new thing. I'd been playing Destiny a lot with our assistant game director, Robbie Stevens, and I was like, this game is so cool. And was very fortunate to, talk with Luke over there, and so I transitioned to join the raid team at Bungie. I was on the raid team, was the raid lead at Bungie for a while. Loved that. I took a brief sabbatical from Bungie around right after Season of Opulence came out, which is a season that I got to work on, and worked at Riot for a year. I absolutely loved my time at Riot, loved the people I worked with over there, worked on some R&D stuff. And then I got the opportunity to come back to Destiny and help be assistant game director and game director. And that was I think the easiest decision for me is I'm such an avid Destiny fan. I've always been an avid Destiny fan. And when Luke's like, Joe, why are you playing 100 hours of Destiny every month? Shouldn't you be working on Destiny still? It was a really easy conversation. I've loved it. And so, yeah, I've been back at Bungie for almost 2 years now, and I'm really happy.
Well, that's great to hear. I remember, I've known you for a while, I guess, at this point, probably closer to 5 years, mostly through social media. And I remember seeing your departure, and I was just sad because I was like, oh man, he worked on so many things that I've grown to kind of love, right? And it's almost kind of like seeing like oh man, my favorite band is breaking up. I'm gonna be a little sad, you know, the raid team and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things on that's so that makes game development so cool, especially at a place like Bungie, is it's so collaborative and like it's forced to be collaborative that no one person's knowledge, like taking that person's away, takes the secret sauce away. We've had so many people move on to awesome opportunities for them, and we're like, oh my god, are we still going to be able to make the game? And it turns out like, oh yeah, they like taught everyone everything they knew, and they were taught what they knew from people here. And so while it like can be like you can see someone on Twitter that's like, you know, sharing a bunch of the knowledge and like, oh, they hold it all, it's like, it's held by so many people. And that's, I think, one of the great things that we've been able to see hopefully at Bungie is you see these people that you love move on to new things. You're like, oh, game still rules, right? Like, and one thing that's awesome about video games is that you know, it's not like a collection of rock stars. It's this like big amorphous blob that really makes a game what it is.
Yeah, I mean, like, what is the term? I can't quite think of it. But even just like for other collaborative efforts too. Like, I know that people always think about like basketball as like the sport that's about each individual star of each individual team, but in reality, you know, it is still a team effort. Like when you're raiding or doing like hard content in a video game that's like an MMO especially, you can't just put everyone else on your back, right? You have to kind of bring everyone up either to your level or like meet theirs, right? Because it's all about the collaborative ending, ideally, of like conquering that thing that you're trying to finish. So I guess for me, I don't know a lot about like C-suite level positions, which I know that like director isn't, I guess, technically that, but like these like really high level corporate positions, as me, a person who's only ever worked retail and streamed, I know literally nothing about that. So what is like your day to day? Like walk me through like the wake up, log off, typical day in the life of a game director for you.
Can I be really rude and just for my own entertainment here?
Uh-oh.
Ask you what you think it is for like can you give the
You're gonna have me
like
show my
two
entire ass
and no,
on
yeah,
stream.
yeah, well, I
Okay,
never get to hear this.
So I wager like, okay, so I know a little bit about game dev, a little bit. I'm just in a little teeny tiny bit, and I know what like a producer does. So a director to me almost sounds like the like top level producer, almost like the one that was going to shape the vision of whatever the thing that you're doing is, right? So when you, I see, it's weird also using you as like the case because you're literally here and you're gonna literally tell me different. But like for you, I imagine that's like, all right, it's somehow taking the mountain of player feedback, the talent that you have, and then choosing, all right, how do I make these two things produce the highest quality like product for people to enjoy? And so you kind of have to choose the direction of where the game is going and kind of like, I guess, stick to that path in case you were ever like drifting away from it.
Yeah.
How stupid do I sound?
No,
I feel like
no,
I sound very dumb.
You're pretty close. I'll say here's the one thing, the hardest thing. So game dev as an industry is still pretty young. And so and we weren't formed off of some, you know, pre-existing structure. So all the terms sort of mean the same things from company to company, but not really, right? And so what a creative director at one company does can be totally different than what a creative director at another company does. So I'll talk about game director. So in this world, we have a bunch of people with director in their title in Destiny. And so the first thing I'll say is I'm not really in the C-suite of Bungie, right?
Okay.
So we have like a Bungie leadership team that's like your Pete Parsons and your OJs, right? And they're like out there really like driving the future of the business forward and making really big calls about Bungie. So I still live really close specifically to Destiny 2. And so game director for us, we have creative directors, we have art directors, we have narrative directors. My job is sort of the holistic vision of Destiny 2, bringing a bunch of those people together and saying, okay, here's the collision of art, narrative, design. I say traditionally a bunch of game directors in the way we organize it come from design, but that's like absolutely not a requirement. I think you have to be able to think about the design of a video game, but you also have to be able to think about the art, think about the narrative,
Hmm.
and really be able to craft the sort of holistic vision for the game. One thing that I try to do is both stay in the far future. We have to do a lot of planning, and so some of my day is the like, what does the final shape look like? What does beyond? What does Saga 2 look like? And
Yeah,
then
what
there's
does
other.
that look like, Joe?
Yeah,
Joe,
yeah,
could you
yeah.
perhaps elaborate on that for me? I'd love to know more.
You'll find out when we get there, right? We got a
How
lot of
dare
stuff to
you?
talk
How dare
about.
you do this to me?
Uh, and then there's a big part which we sort of made a push here recently, which is myself, Adam, our narrative director, Mike or Sheik, our art directors, is like to get close to the game. And so I refer to this as like I always want to be on set somewhere, right? And so there's an execution of this where I think you could be like, hey, I'm talking a lot about Destiny, but you're doing it back from like some office in downtown LA, and you're just making phone calls about what you want. It's really important. I think a bunch of the guiding work is getting close to something, and not only you being able to help shape directly, but also you seeing continually how the sausage is made and how it changes, and where people are strong and where people need help. And it's so hard to get that from detached. So I say half of my day is far future Destiny. The other half of my day is either like really emergent stuff in anything in Destiny. This is the like, oh my god, there's a huge bug, and we have three options. Which one we're gonna choose?
All
Oh,
right, how
it
are we
could be
fixing
it could be.
Telesto this time? We
Yeah,
gotta we gotta find a new way to fix it.
Oh, the Telestos, that's got a pipeline. That's solved. We just send it back to the Telesto pipeline. The like this really exploit that comes out. We don't know if we should fix it or not. Like, where does it solve? A bunch of
Is
those.
the new Telesto feature like? Is it now
Yeah,
is it an
yeah.
intrinsic exotic perk for it to break something?
So I try to get integrated with those, and any time that I think we're making a decision that's going to be potentially have a lot of blowback, make sure that I'm the person that is putting their head in the guillotine, essentially, and taking responsibility for those. And then the most fun is I've got pretty direct involvement into our annual releases. So, sort of the Witch Queens, the Lightfalls, the Final Shapes. I stay pretty close to those in the direction
Mhm.
of those, as just sort of a way to help see where the product is going. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the what I do day to day. I'll ramble a little bit more. You'll find this is the like
I
the
love it. I'm
classic
learning.
Joe.
I am absorbing as much information as I can.
So yeah, I'll say the easy thing, which is I no longer have the Destiny toolset installed on my machine, which is a great sadness to me, but there are no more Joe check-ins to Destiny. I would love to make a strike, or I'd love to like secretly join Chris Proctor's team and be like, Chris, teach me how to make weapons. I want to know how to make weapons in Destiny. I No one will let me do that anymore. And they say, hey, Joe, that's not your job anymore. So no direct interaction with the tools. What I'm doing most of the time is meetings. And so there's a few different ways of that, right? I start about 8, 9 o'clock, try to get off by 6 because I like really want to make time for my family every night.
As you
And
should.
so,
Literally everybody
yeah,
should. I say that for everybody.
yeah.
No matter how important you are at your job, you're still allowed to be a human being.
Yeah, and I get so much energy back from interacting with my family. I feel very fortunate to be, surrounded by people that I love. The the meetings in there, they're going to range from, hey, we're looking at what season 16 is, right? So we're going to do a big review. Here's what the concept is for it, and then Robbie's going to get up and present a bunch, or maybe Jason's going to get up and present a bunch, and then I'm just there to understand what's going on there. Hey, give any feedback, and then they're going to keep trucking on a bunch of that content. There's the, hey, we've hit a really bad roadblock in something, right? And so I'd say a big part of making video games is making the calls that are not fun, right? And it's not the, hey, what do we want to add to the game? Do we want to add flamethrowers or do we want to add jetpacks? Like, that's a really fun decision. I think what's happens a lot is, hey, we've hit this really bad issue. We don't have a good option out of here, right? Here's an emergent thing. So we're going to describe a bunch of choices. hey, when it gets escalated up to me, most of the conversations I think are pretty spicy and high stress, and so I try to come in there and as best I can help push things along in a way that makes people feel positive about them and get things moving. Um, I'll say the other thing, a bunch of one-on-one conversations with people, checking out on how they're doing, on what's the most important thing in their plate, if there's anything they need help with, and then I do a ton of this is the work from home secret. I do a ton of multitasking, where I think one of the secrets about work from home is if I'm in a meeting and I know that we're going to be talking for 2 hours, I will just be playing The Witch Queen while I'm in the meeting. I will be playing
Mm.
season 16. And so I can do a bunch of this. Hey, I'm just supposed to be listening to this meeting, and I can generate a bunch of feedback or talk to people. But hey, I just played this mission. It's so awesome, right? And I use that to really stay stay in step with what's going on.
Joe, I have to ask, are you playing Witch Queen right now while we're talking?
I'm not. So the secret, and the people have noticed this at Bungie, is how often do you see Joe's
Oh
hands,
no. Are you so
right?
do you are you like a
Like,
controller guy? So it's like
yeah. So I have a. This is my Bungie Xbox 360
that
controller.
looks battle hardened if I'm being honest.
Yeah. So it's actually I need to get a new controller because the A button sticks, and I keep putting alcohol in it. But it's like past the point of that being a fix anymore. But this
I'm
is like
so
the
dumb. I definitely thought she meant like you were spilling like
just
drinks
I
on it.
keep
And I was
putting
just like and I was just trying to think like why are you doing that?
yeah, and so I have this thing though that this was the controller I got when I started at Bungie, and like
Oh.
I secretly stole it and kept it even when I left Bungie, and I still have it back, and I just I can't move on to a new controller to play the game with.
Mm.
So uh one day, yeah, I'll get a sweet, one of those custom new controllers that you can order online, but right now, yeah, that's the secret. If you ever see Joe's hands missing for too long, or yeah, someone will call me out like, Joe, you're making some real gamer face right now during this
It's
meeting.
real. It looks a lot like you're trying not to die in a Grandmaster Nightfall right now. Is this you,
Yeah,
Joe?
yeah.
But like I see I wouldn't be able to do that because like my screen flashes too like it's too bright. Like I have too like
Mm.
quote unquote the fidelity is too high. So if I was doing that, they'd be like you'd see like I don't know like death flashes on my screen, so like you just see my face light up a whole bunch. Oh, Sam, are you playing a video game during this interview right now? No.
No.
It's also, could you repeat what you said for the past 20 minutes? It's unrelated. I had a tech issue. um Okay, so another thing that I wanted to touch on, because you talked about how like being a game director for you is like the I think you might have said the word collision, but like the intersection between like narrative design and gameplay and all these things coming together. Does that also, like, at least in your specific case for working at Bungie, does that go back to all the way thinking about like your roots of like what was going on in Destiny 1 and how it can like carry over to Destiny 2? Or is there kind of like a moving timeline of things that you think are like important to keep in mind? I don't know if that question makes sense or not.
It does. I think one of the one of the reasons that I love working on Destiny so much is that I love it as a game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I have a lot of personal baggage with the game, things I like, things I don't like. But I try as much to ingrain myself in the community and get sort of hey, here's what people are thinking, and not just be making. There's obviously some version of Destiny that I think you could choose any Bungie employee that they'd be like, if we're just making the game for me, right? Like, this is what the menu becomes. And so I try to avoid doing that, and I try to also, as much as possible, understand not what Destiny necessarily was in Destiny 1 or was in Destiny when Destiny 2 shipped, but what Destiny 2 is and what Destiny 2 needs to be. Like, what is the core identity of the game? Um, because I think as long as we understand what our core is, we can keep making
Mm-hmm.
that core better and better. Um, and there's always a real danger of like making a change that really hurts the core of what you are and takes the game to a place where, hey, like this isn't what we want anymore. It's Destiny. I think any game before it releases, especially a live service game, is really an infusion of what a team wants the game to be, right? It's this infusion of a bunch of minds. Like, here's what we really wanted to create. Once you go into live service world, it becomes more than that. You're not just making the game that you want to make. You have a whole, passionate player base, and they're there for a reason. You don't know, when we talk about something like crafting that comes on, we don't know how the community is going to pick it up and what they're going to like about the system and what they're not going to like. But we're definitely going to use that to determine, okay, like here's what that is in the future, and here's why that is. Yeah, so I think it's about trying to keep on the pulse of what the game is, way less than maybe what it was in Destiny 1, what it is now, and what it should be in the next few years.
Can I ask you a harder question to follow that one up
Sure.
with?
Yeah.
What happens when you have finger on the pulse, you're doing your best, but you flat out miss the mark? Like, what do you do internally when you know that, like, maybe you had an idea and unfortunately it just falls flat for whatever reason? Like, how do you proceed from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different versions of this. There's one is like you trip and fell, right? And so you have like a bruise on your knee. And you're like, whatever, the bruise is gonna heal, right? Like, we shipped a thing, it wasn't what we wanted to be, but like it's fine because that bruise will heal over time, and we'll make something better, we'll learn from it. There's the other version where you trip and you like skin your knee, or you like put a gash in your knee, and you're like, oh no, my leg is bleeding, right? Like, and you're like, hey, what do I have to do to get the bleeding to stop, right? Because this is not maybe a thing that's going to heal on its own, right? It's not like a thing that we can, just say, well, we missed the mark on that one, but we've learned something from it, because it's actively still causing damage. And so I think there's two versions of that. There's like, hey, the cut's not that bad, and so what we're going to learn from here is like, we don't have the bandwidth to go in and fix it, but it's naturally going to scab over time. This could be like, we make a feature and it's not great, or people don't love it like we thought we were going to love it, and we just say, you know what, we're just not going to support that feature anymore, right? Like, it had its time in the sun. Maybe it's an activity type, and we're like, it did okay, right? And so like, we're not going to make more of those though. The other version of this is we put something in the game, and like the cut is deep, and it is not going to scab over on itself, and we have like, potentially, if we don't go in and fix something, it's going to hurt the game long term. And so those are the ones where it's pretty difficult for us, and we say, okay, how are we going to fix this? When can we fix it? And so you start looking for short-term solutions and long-term solutions. The short-term solution might be like, okay, let's just like tourniquet the leg as quick as we can, right? Like, there's a horrible economy exploit, it's going to ruin the game in like 5 days, right? Like, well, okay, turn it off, right? Like, this is the turn Telesto off, right? Like, it's breaking the game, right? Like, just turn it off.
I just imagine in like the like a Bungie war room, there's just like there's like a locked box that is just the Telesto box, where like you and Luke Smith go in with like two really cool looking keys and open like this like briefcase and just smash a giant button that turns off Telesto.
I love the patch notes today are great. That's such an interesting case that, a gun that, sorry, we're going to go on a brief tangent. A gun that creates stuff that you can kill is a really interesting thing for Destiny, because of how much stuff is triggered off of stuff that is killed.
I mean, even like I know we meme about it, but even briefly today, or I think it was maybe a couple days ago, where DMG tweeted kind of like some ideas around why like it breaks so often, because of how many different things it's like attaching to itself to make the gun work. Is just so strange. Maybe it was in the patch notes. Maybe I forget exactly where I read it at.
Yeah, I'll give you guys a weird story. We'll go on tangent land. When we were making,
we don't do that here. We don't go on tangent.
Okay, sorry. No fun stories. I won't tell a King's Fall story then.
All right, just this one time.
Okay.
And also the rest of the show. Go for
it. Yeah, so one of the original Oryx mechanics for King's Fall was not that you stood in like a bomb and you charged the bomb. It was like you stood in an area and you charged the bomb by getting kills.
Interesting.
And like, there was some cool stuff about that, and it sort of made there like this like sort of zone capture-y aspect to the game. We had like an untrackable tech problem at that time, where like immediately in tests, what we saw was people were not like killing the acolytes. They'd like throw their hunter grenade against the wall, their trip mine grenade, and they'd shoot it. And they'd be like, "Got to kill." Uh,
Oh.
and so there's a bunch of ways that like, hey, we could have tracked down, I think, a bunch of different incidents there. I'm like, these are the exact shape and size that we're going to listen to. Interestingly, things like Telesto that provide you ways to kill things in a game that broadly in some other says, I just want to reward kills here, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, that's one of the
that's one of the things with blind well originally too, was the Telesto
Mhm.
interaction between bolts exploding in the blind well.
Yeah, and so that's one of the many multifaceted interesting things about Telesto, right? It's got a bunch of those properties, but when you're making a game like Destiny, we talk about like, hey, how problems break out is everything is so force multiplicative off of each other. That one like weird entry into the machine can like break a bunch of stuff that you don't expect.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I will say is absolutely critical to Bungie's success. We ship bugs. We will always ship bugs. It's part of game development. I hope that doesn't surprise anyone. Uh, but we triage the game so early. What triage is like, hey, we start just shutting down what you can put in the game. And for months before something goes out, we are very restrictive about what we even fix. Because anytime we even fix something, we've changed the game a little bit, right? And so fixing a small bug can enter a big bug into the game. And so we take months where we're like, yeah, we're that little geo bug, fine, right? It is not worth the risk of fixing
Mhm.
that thing and potentially breaking the whole game. And I think it's just part of making these giant games. You just have to be so careful with what you're putting in the sauce, and at some point, just be like, kick everyone out. No one's allowed to put anything more in the can. They're like, but it's too salty. And we're like, it's okay if it's too salty. Just don't knock over the pot and spill it all over the floor.
Sure. So I guess like the follow-up question I would have is, I feel like there's a lot of opinions, let's call them that,
Sure.
about what you put out, and I think there's this narrative that that you put out a lot of those bugs because you do not do what you just said. So what would you say to people who feel like, shipping X, Y, or Z bug because it's part of their favorite piece of content is unacceptable? Like, how does something that gets revealed so quickly, by us players? What do you say to those people for how it almost feels egregious, right? Like, because it gets found so quickly. How do you respond to those kind of comments?
Yeah, I think most of the bugs that we call, like, we punt them, right? We say, hey, we're not going to fix this right now. Those are not the things that the community gets upset about.
Yeah.
I'll give another example from my past that like Joe as a young designer was really upset about. In Kingsfall in Golgoroth, the Geo, when Golgoroth dies, you can walk inside of it, and you can like see inside the seams of the bad guy.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And I was like, oh, this Geo it should have physics. You should be able to stand on top of it. People are gonna want to stand on top of it. And they were like, Joe, there's no way we're fixing that, right? Like, it just doesn't matter at this point, right? Like, and because like rightfully so. We did not punt. Like, we did not discover the like, hey, do you know that you can do this like really what seems obvious when 2 million people play the encounter, which is like, you can like do the whole encounter with one orb. Like, and isn't that like break a bunch of the cool parts of the thing? Those are, I think, the bugs that we discover when we have 2 million people play the game instantly. And I think those
Mm-hmm.
become the ones that then we start looking at them and say, is this a bruise? Is this a cut? Is this a gash? Like, and where are we going to start,
That makes sense.
fixing them? I think the reason that, we will always have some of that is that what makes Destiny different than World of Warcraft or some of our other sort of MMO competition is that we have this like mystery quality to the game. It's like no one's seen the raid, right? Like when the raid comes out, there's
Mm-hmm.
been no test servers, there's no videos of the fight on YouTube. when the campaign comes out, you haven't already played it on a test realm. And so that's part of our magic. That's part of our sauce. And I think that, with that, we're going to find some stuff when it goes live, right? We're going to find some big, issues when you get 2 million people slamming on it. So with us accepting that trade-off, I'm actually really proud consistently of like how awesome our test org is and how awesome a bunch of this stuff is getting squashed.
Yeah.
Because like consistently we're putting out things that like, hey, you play through the main campaign. I didn't get blocked, right? Like nothing happened that like ruined my experience. And the amount of hard work that goes into just making that true, that like, hey, does the game ever crash? I'm like, pretty seldomly, right? Like pretty seldomly does it crash.
Thankfully, unless there's too many orbs on the ground, and then we don't speak of Guitar Man. We don't speak of him. So I guess to ask kind of like a more pointed question, how do you decide between like two, like, so as the game director, you're shaping like the game's vision, and you're shaping kind of what the game is with all of these interdisciplinary things all at the same time. So you mentioned how, at least for King's Fall, which for those who don't know is a Destiny 1 raid, and you mentioned a boss where basically you need to stand in a puddle and shoot him in the stomach for a lot of damage. And that's kind of the overarching mechanic of it. How do you decide when to... So let's say that's an emerging issue, right? And you have the whole cut, bruise, band-aid conversation. Like, how do you even begin to think about something? Let's say Riven. So Riven's another. It's a boss from Last Wish. Right. So it is this pinnacle activity, and this is the pinnacle moment, right? And it turns out you can do some very silly shit. We'll just call it that with that raid boss. What is the thought process behind, like, do we leave it as is? Is it worth fixing? Because, like, that is something that players may enjoy it more because they can get more rewards, right? And that's just factual. You do the activity faster and you get the thing. But is that better, right? Like, is that better? It's gonna be better for some people, absolutely, because there's tons of opinions, right, about how to spend your time and different ways of playing. Some folks are only about the reward system. They don't really care about the experience, so they're gonna say, yeah, I want to keep this. But then there's some people who really, really want, I love the music and like the feeling of beating this boss. And, they don't ever get to experience that anymore because most groups just don't do it that way. So what do you do in that situation where it seems like there is just quite literally no winning? There is no winning for anyone involved, it feels. So what do you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, a bunch of those, like, we'll go back and past Joe, like raid lead, because I want to say that so many of these decisions, like, these are not the kind of things where like anyone at the, they might be a raid lead or a weapons lead, they don't need my help on this. They don't need Robbie's help on this. They have a very clear idea of what we should do, and like, we try to keep a bunch of the teams really autonomous on a bunch of that, and really only get involved when it's like, hey, this is like really butting the edge. But like, let's talk about Riven, or like maybe Golgroth and the difference between those two.
Yeah, if you have a different example that fits better, that explains kind of what I'm asking, you are more than welcome to answer that way as well.
Yeah, so I think these are both great examples. One of the first things that we think about was definitely in D1, and even in this era in D2, it took us so long to get any update out to the game. Right, and so it was so hard for us to make a new build of the game and to get it out in time that when we looked at something like when could we fix Golgroth or when could we fix Riven, the time is like, okay, well, we can get it in a vehicle like a patch that's gonna go out next month. And when that's the case, we start to look really like, okay, is this going to be the dominant expected way to play this by next month? How many people will have like really be like sunsetting on their time in this experience? And will the change then feel like, hey, Bungie, you've taken away this thing that's really part of the experience because you didn't like it, right? And if you make that change within a 24, 36, 7-day period, I think it's like, nope, it's going back to the way it was intended. At a certain point after a month, like the way it was intended doesn't really matter anymore because this is now the truth. And I think to go back and fix some of those things, to talk about like fixing Riven or talk about fixing Golgoroth, it'd be like, why did the thing just get harder, right? Like The rewards didn't change. They think that the whole experience just sort of got harder.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've seen our like paradigm shift a bunch on this as we've been able to patch the game a lot faster. You see those like the Tanixes of the world and the the Black Gardens. When stuff comes up, it's able to get squashed a lot faster. And this is like a huge amount of work has gone into being able to patch Destiny faster, and so it's really allowed us to do a bunch of this. The other thing that I think we think about here is how much of it does it feel like an exploit versus how much does it feel like a creative strategy? And then the final one is how much player benefit is there to fixing this thing versus working on the next thing, right? Because it's always a zero sum, right? And so when like a person in a previous life gets sucked back out and says, "Hey, go change this thing," that's coming at the cost of making something new, right? That's coming at the cost of the quality of something new. So we're always making those trade-offs. And man, a bunch of times
That
we're
sucks.
like, "Hey,
like, I just
sorry,
wanna be honest,
person."
Like, this just sounds like it sucks because, like, I mentioned it before that I can't even imagine how stressful it must be to be in charge of, like, all right, who do we get to decide gets to have like the most fun with like the most big quotes I can imagine, right? Like, what type of player are we going to benefit the most? Because that means that sometimes you as a player don't get your needs met because, like, unfortunately there's millions of people. And like, I'm good. I don't want to be a game director. I'm fine. I'm good.
Also, one of the most fun things I got to do at Destiny was right after finishing Wrath of the Machine. Me and a tester and a really small group got to do the Age of Triumph D1 reprisals.
Oh.
And so going back and doing Crota and Vault of Glass, and I think so much of your ideas as a designer, they're like, you have this bad idea, you try it out, it's really bad, you change it. One of the most fun parts of this is we knew exactly how Vault of Glass worked, and we knew exactly how Crota's End worked. And so it's one of the few times where we're like, okay, this is the new plan for the bridge encounter. And I have the like notebook next to me, and it's like,
nice.
What we wrote down is just what it turned into, because we'd seen so many play it so many times. We're like, hey, we know how to fix this, and we know what to lean on, and we know it's great. And so getting to revisit some of that stuff. That's why I think even the Vault of Glass reprise this year, why we're so excited to put out another reprise right this year, is it gives us the chance to like go back and look at some of those things and be like, hey, we know a lot about this experience. And so that's really sort of our version of like getting to do, a 2.0 or something. And those are always great.
So it sounds like, just based off of these past few questions, and I know you kind of touched on this at the start about being very focused on like Witch Queen and like the final shape, which is, the coming titles for Destiny 2 for you guys just don't play and you're just listening for whatever other reason.
Because of you, T. They're here because of you.
So with that in mind, it kind of sounds like you already said that you kind of like being, in person. You don't want to be detached from the community or from like the other developers around these projects. How much of what you're doing on like the day-to-day is informing like the future plans? Or is it kind of like very nebulous to where it's like we have a very clear future of where we're trying to go, and instead it kind of works backwards to where how do we fit what the future is with what we're doing now versus fitting what we're doing now into the future?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned is we need to understand where certain things are going, but we need to be pretty loose about that. So I think one thing that we're getting way better at is narrative direction. Hey, here's where the characters are, here's where they're going. But like a AAA product may have a AAA like single player yearly thing. They may have two totally different studios working on totally different things, and they're gonna say, hey, yeah, in 2 years your game comes out, and another 2 years, and you have these big 4-year cycles. Destiny is informed so much about what's happening that the longer that we work out and the more concrete that plan gets, the less useful it is, right? You could like really discover something like an umbral system in a season that like changes the way a bunch of people think about Destiny and about progression. And if we'd have gotten really like concrete with our plans and spent 2 years, that could have all just been wasted work because we're like, oh yeah, I mean we could take it in this totally different direction, but like people like systems like this, and so for us, it's about having that balance of, hey, we want to stay loose, we want to have an idea of where we're going, we want to seem like the ship is headed in the right direction, uh, but we like that the people that worked on these teams, the people that worked on the Witch Queen, are the same people that are going to work on Lightfall, right? And they're going to take all that knowledge, and that all while that's happening, they're seeing what's happening live in the seasonal releases. And our seasonal teams, they like fire out 2 of these a year per team. They're really getting a bunch of knowledge on it and constantly trying to be like, okay, what did we learn? How can we get it in, right? And how can we sort of adjust?
Was it that way at other companies, if you can even speak on that, or is that like a Bungie exclusive thing, or is that like pretty common in game dev? Like that mentality of having the present inform your future and trying to be very mobile.
I think you'll see this a bunch in the successful live service world, right? I think the most successful. I mean, I'll give kudos to all the fine people at Riot. I think one of the reasons they're so successful with their games is that the people that make those games play those games and love those games and understand them, and they have the finger on the pulse, right? And it's so hard to not just make what you want when you aren't really engaging with the present, right? And so I think a bunch of people find that like there's only so far out you can work, because the farther out you get, the more you're like, players just don't understand. They don't know this thing is coming, right? And so you start getting more and more separated from this, thing. But you have to be able to be far enough out too that you're not just building the plane as you're flying it. So it's really a delicate balance. But I think that you'll see a bunch of the other leaders in live service, right? They try to keep this mix of both being far enough out that you can make big innovations, but not being so far that you've lost touch with what your game is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd also have to like almost kind of check your ego at the door, to where you need to be humble enough to know, to listen, right? Because like I obviously make content, and sometimes I make content that people don't like, and like it is tough to acknowledge that this thing that I had was so sure I knew exactly how it was gonna go, and it just wasn't that when it came out. And then you have to be like, all right, I need to listen again, maybe try again. And being a director seems like that's a lot of what you do, maybe.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure you do a lot of this too. It's about mixing a bunch of those priorities too. We've talked a lot about making sure you understand what the community wants, but like there's so much context that the people that are playing your game don't understand about the making of the game, or don't understand that like, hey, maybe you've walked down some of these roads before, and they probably don't have any context of what's going on in the business side of the game and a bunch of things that need to happen there. And so it's really this fusion of, hey, can you align all these priorities? And also like, we talk a bunch about this, but there's so many crazy, passionate, awesome people at Bungie that we still want some of that, like, hey, like learn about what the community is, but like I want to see what you've got. I want to see what your stank, like put that on Destiny, right? Like
put your stank on Destiny. Joe Blackburn 2021. Work for Bungie. Put your stank on it. What a good marketing tool.
Yeah, I think that's the one of the things that we really look for is the like, hey, how can you be given like a tight box of constraints, because that's what we always operate in, right? It's so rare anyone hands you a blank page and says just do whatever you want here, and instead it's someone that hands you like a box with a bunch of objects that don't look like they fit together, and like how can you arrange those? And like, oh my god, you made a statue, right? Like that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And so it takes a lot of creative thinking to be able to do any of that, and it's not just about being able to do what someone tells you. It's about being able to understand what they want and then be able to make that within the constraints that you have.
Well, I mean, that's why I love raiding in every video game I play, is just because it's like, it's gameplay levels of like creative problem solving. So like that's also why I love learning about game dev in general. Is just that it just seems so fascinating to me, like learning exactly how like my favorite hobby gets made, you know. So to move on to like a kind of a, we haven't really touched on this yet. This is maybe more of a personal question. What is you, in your opinion, for your road to being a game director? This could involve, you know, any part of your game journey. What is, in your opinion, the best thing that you've learned, and also what was, if you can mention it, or you can mention any of them, but what do you think is your biggest mistake? Like, thing, if you could go back and learn the thing the mistake taught you without making the mistake, what would it be, if it's possible?
Okay, I'll talk about the hard one first.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing that I still struggle with, and I think everyone it's so important to understand where you struggle. I think especially early in my career, I really disliked having hard conversations with people, right? Like, and I would say, "Oh my gosh, like look at this thing. I really don't like it," and I would complain about it, or I would complain about, you know, a way that, you know, maybe one of my coworkers was acting. But I did not want to have the hard one-on-one conversation with the like, "Hey, the thing that you did there really hurt my feelings," or "Hey, I think that like you're acting in a way that's like really affecting the whole team, and you probably don't know that your attitude is spreading out here," or like, that's all in creative too, right? Like it's so easy to talk about being unhappy with the decision someone made, and not just talking with them one-on-one and understanding. And so I think one of the things I struggle with the most, and one of the things I think is the, you know, can sink any ship, is how do you have the hard conversations early? And anytime someone's had a hard conversation with me, I really appreciate it, right? And there's so many times someone has come to me and said, "Hey Joe, the thing that you did there, it like really hurt me," or like, "I think you're screwing up in this way and you don't know it." And it's never fun to hear that, but all those people later in my career are the people that I like really trust, and that I'm like, yeah, I know that if this was going wrong, they would tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to, you know, a thing that is my natural like people pleaser. I don't want someone to be mad at me. I don't want them to think I don't like them.
As a content creator who is also a people pleaser, it's like chat is basically that in a nutshell. Even like this is, I am not trying to compare banning someone in chat with creating a game thing, but it's something that at least I can understand. Is I don't like conflict, and I don't want to have to ban people in my chat because I want people to feel welcome, right? And there's, I think that maybe this I think it's almost a misconception that conflict is inherently bad, right? But sometimes conflict is just a way for you to grow as a person, maybe receiving criticism or having conflict with one another. But talking it out is something that I think that we should just be doing more in general, for at least for topics that deserve to be talked out and deserve to be discussed, which in like the workplace, I think is especially hard because you need to make sure that you aren't, you know, coming across too hard or even potentially too soft. You know, it's a really complex situation that I don't envy, I suppose, because like I said, I also hate having to have hard conversations with people. It sucks.
Yeah, and also I'm gonna just be super candid with this. This is still a thing that I still struggle with. I'm like super open and easy to talk about when it's purely in the creative space. Like, hey, we shouldn't do this because of X. When it's in the like,
this is also a question in chat, but like, what do you what's the trick to getting better at it? Since you and I are both improving, like, what do you do to be better about having those conversations?
rip the band-aid off sooner. Don't let it fester. And then I think also focus on you and your relationship with that person being the outlet for that, and not you developing a secondary outlet, right? Like it's really easy to have a tough interaction with someone and then go talk to someone else that you have a great relationship with and be like, listen to this shit, right? Like, and that becomes, you are able to get it off your chest, and you maybe even feel like you've moved on from it, right? Because you've gotten to get it out of your system, but you didn't actually help that person, and you didn't actually help your relationship with that person. And so how can you instead, have that direct? I get better at this by working with people that are good at it, and talking to them about it. I've had a few really great mentors that are like, yeah, they'll let you know, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, that didn't hurt me when that person told me that, so it probably won't hurt the other person. Yeah, it's tough. Wait, I'm gonna do the good one now. Um, yeah, the thing that is has been super helpful to me, and the thing that I would always recommend is learn how to help others by seeing the good in something. In game development, you play a lot of trash. Like here's a secret: a lot of stuff early in development, it's just not very good, right? It all comes together at the very end, and the secret, I think, it's really easy. Everyone that we work with is so smart and so talented. It's so easy to go and look at something and be like, well, here's my 20-page essay on everything that's wrong with what I just played. And that stuff is helpful to someone that maybe be blind to it, but it doesn't tell them where they need to go. It tells them where they shouldn't go. And if you can play something that's early in development and is not sanded down, but you can see the diamond in the rough in it, and you can be like, hey, here's the thing that you're doing that works, right? And here's what I loved about it. And like, yeah, here's some of the rough areas, but like, here's what I love. What they'll go do is they will excavate that diamond, right? And they will then come up with something that's like, oh my God, it's all about the thing that was good. And so, yeah, I think the people that we routinely move up in the org, that we routinely like people love to work with, are the people that can see something that's in bad shape and help someone by identifying the good in it.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Because, like, from, like, a creative standpoint, I think that finding the fun, I think, is almost the term that I've heard used a couple times. Is, like, that is worth its weight in gold. Because everyone, I mean, I've made stuff I'm not proud of. Some stuff you've seen, some stuff you haven't. Not in the sense that I'm, like, ashamed of it, but just, like, I can understand it wasn't good. You know, like, I love writing. I am not a good writer. I've written some garbage, and it exists in a private drawer that you will never see. You know, and I think that in game dev sometimes, like, I think it comes back to, like, swallowing your pride a little bit, you know? Like, it's got to be tough, because it's like your baby, right? It's the thing that you've spent so much time and effort on. And sometimes you have to be told not only, you know, the bad stuff, but then being like, yes, I thought this idea was good. And it's nice to have confirmation that it is, right? So moving on to, like, also chat, I've been reading you, by the way. I know you all have questions. We're gonna get there. I love you. My voice cracked as if I was a scared child of chat. I'm not. I promise. You don't scare me yet. So do you think that your current position at Bungie, being the director, is like a natural progression of what you've wanted? Like, as you've learned and progressed more in the games industry, are you now, like, at the spot where, like, yes, this is what the culmination of my experience is, like, designed for? Or do you think that there's something else out there for you, like, in the far-flung future? Not like saying you're gonna leave Bungie tomorrow, but, you know, what else are you working towards?
Are you familiar with Formula One or the popular Netflix show Drive to Survive?
I'm familiar with Formula One. I do not know about Drive to Survive.
Okay. So here's another great tidbit about me. I love to get into stuff and then shape all my metaphors around it. So currently in the Blackburn household, that's Formula One. Formula One is a culmination of a bunch, like any driver is a culmination of a bunch of people's work. And so there are huge teams that put together a car. There's like a big structure that, like, goes out and figures out how to secure funding. There's someone that's just like, hey, do we have the right drivers in the right seats? And then there's the thing above that, which is even like, hey, what is Formula One? There are people that run that whole show. I think being a game director is like, hey, there's 1,000 people and it's up to you to drive the car on the race day. And it is a lot of ways horrifying and dangerous, and like you're going 200 miles an hour and you might crash into the wall. But I love it. Like, and I like, if you told me today that someone's like, Joe, I've got this great opportunity, you can like go help Bungie find a bunch of stuff. I'm like, can I please just keep making games? Right? Like that's what I want to do. And so
That's awesome.
Yeah, right now I want to keep making games, and I want to keep making Destiny. Like we got a story to tell here.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I mean, like, I guess because I'm someone who I guess hasn't found my contentment perfectly yet in my workplace. It's very interesting to hear people who have, you know. Okay then. So, is there anything you miss? Like, because I know you mentioned that like you really wanted to, like have the tools on your computer so you could like, hey, teach me how to make a weapon. I want to make a weapon. Do you ever like have any kind of regret over maybe not having some of the creative outlets you used to with your work?
I'll say, while I hope and strive to be a nice human as much as possible, I'm also like a deeply competitive human. Like I love that other people are like they make something. I'm like, oh, I want to make something as good as that. The thing that I will do regularly is I will play like I've done a bunch of different kinds of design. I think really activity and encounter design is sort of at the core. Every so often, I will play a thing in Destiny, and it will be so good, and I'll be like, "Fuck, I want to make activities again." Right? Like, I put me back in, coach. Right? Like, I want to show them that the old man still has it. And so I think every so often when I play something that's just like it knocks it out of the park, I'm like, "Oh man, I wish that was me. I wish I'd gotten to make that."
That's totally fair. Okay. We have about roughly 30 minutes left, and I think it's time for us to take questions from the audience. I
I
would
love
like to
it.
once again remind you, chat, because I feel like it bears repeating, that this is ideally more about game design than it is about asking Destiny-specific questions. So Joe and I had a conversation beforehand about the ground rules we're gonna have about some of these questions that we're gonna ask from you all. I have the questions in front of me. There is many of them. And Joe has the out of him not wanting to respond or being unable to, stuff like that. So I am letting you know that in advance. I'm going to ask one that isn't technically, it hasn't been in this tweet thread that I saw, but it's been in chat a lot. Do you have anything to say about the future of Trials being the game director?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I'm really proud of the work that we did recently with Trials. I don't even know where I said this. I thought it was someone publicly, but we did a lot of work recently. I think that I certainly wish we'd been able to line up the rewards of when Trials got an awesome reward set and the hey, here's all the game mode changes. But I think we see that on a really positive trajectory. What I see really with PvP all up is hey, I think we've started to carve Trials an identity for itself. And we understand that, like, okay, there's a reward structure that's going to work. I'm really proud of the work that the team keeps doing on it. Like, it's also been a great vehicle for us that's like, man, we've been pushing out a lot of Trials changes pretty frequently. And so, what does it mean to be supporting the ritual game? I think next for me is like, let's get Trials into a good spot, and then let's look at Iron Banner.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at what the other modes are that we can start saying, okay, we understand how Trials fits in the puzzle. How does regular Crucible fit into the puzzle? How
Mm-hmm.
does Gambit fit in the puzzle? And I think it will constantly be we shine something up and then we move on to the next thing, and then we move on to the next thing. And by the time we've shined the fourth thing, we're looking back and said, oh, we certainly have shined that one in a while, right? And so we'll go
Sure.
back and make it shiny again.
So I'm gonna phrase this question to be more game dev centric, but I think that people who love the game can maybe figure out what I'm asking. So, for a live service title that you're a game director for, how do you balance bringing back old things that people desire for? So hypothetically speaking, this is hypothetical. I need you to hypothetical here. How do you bring back like old trial sets? Like, what is your opinion on bringing old content that has passed in a live service title because it's constantly evolving and stuff like that? What is your opinion on bringing that stuff to the forefront or reprising it as a term that you've used?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a bunch of stuff here. I think anything that we want to bring back, we want to bring back because we think it's something that's meaningful to players, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so when we talk about bringing an exotic back or an armor set back, we want to make sure that hey, this is like something that players value. I think all of that stuff. I think that we've said this before. None of it is free. Like it is a monumental amount of work to recreate anything. We've done a bunch of engine changes. So we also look at like, hey, if we could bring back X or we could make new thing, is X cooler, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
is new thing cooler? And so for us, it's also like, man, obviously bringing Galahorn back, it feels like Destiny's gonna be in its like, oh, this is Destiny again, right? Can you really have Destiny without Galahorn? That's like an easy one to be like, okay, yeah, it needs to be back in the fold. And I think with some of those armor sets, we look at the same things, right? We look like, hey, is this like a really iconic look? Are we pushing looks in another direction? And that's like part of the decision process there.
So this is kind of a more refined question for what I saw a lot of, because people have questions on like, we also kind of touched this earlier about like going back and editing current available features, let's say fixing a bug or polishing something. What is the actual work that goes into so we'll use like I guess you could either do trials or like the repriced weapons, whatever you want to pick. What kind of work goes into doing that? Actually bringing something or changing an old feature to update it. What is that process like?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I can. Let's talk about an activity first. I guess if we talk about bringing a D1 activity to D2.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I think that is first of all, it all has to be made again, right? And so someone has to like look at the thing and they can probably pull it up on their computer, but they are remaking a bunch of that work. There's not just like a import from Destiny 1 button. Then I think there's the more nuanced work of, hey, you know that like a D1 strike unchanged or a Vault of Glass unchanged does not a Destiny 2 activity make, it turns out, right? Like we are constantly in the like, everything's a little bit better this season than it was last season. So if you just ship old Omnigul, turns out like players just gonna blast through it, right? And so then there's the nuanced work of what do we have to do to update it for Destiny 2. And that work can take, some amount of time, but the goal. The goal is to get it to feel like it did, right? You're trying to give that nostalgia. Um, I think the same thing is true for talking about a weapon, right? There's obviously all the artwork that needs to be redone. There's, hey, you have to upgrade it for new lighting. That stuff can be like, look at the Destiny 1 model, try to make it look like that thing, try to remind players of that. And then the gameplay, they have to do the same thing. But like uh, a Destiny 2 Galahorn that's just straight imported probably does not going to give you the same like, oh my gosh, this is what this gun felt like to me. So it's about taking those elements that that you made the gun what it is, right? And be like, okay, here's we're gonna have to zhuzh it up, right? You can see this with like a gun like Mythoclast, right? That just came out.
I was just gonna point out that I believe that you just said that the Yalnhorn is gonna be different. I was if it's not the exact same, how am I gonna live? How am I gonna be able to post on a looking for group forum that they must have Yalrhorn if it's not the same?
Yeah, I think this is like it's a no surprise Sladley kind of thing. That's like, you can look at Mythoclast, you can look at anything that we've brought forward and say, okay, how can we keep the heart of this thing, right? But then, what an exotic is from Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 is different, right?
Yeah,
and that's true. I think across
it
all the
very
board.
much is. Like the design philosophy for so many things, it's just kind of evolved. Like I think is probably the best way to put it. Okay, so another question. Once again, I'm trying to phrase these to not be like, this is my very specific question. Okay, so when you're faced with a decision that is going to take something away from the player experience because it is necessary. So this example is like the Destiny content vault, to where Bungie has stated that the reasoning behind that is for tech debt, because balancing stuff around every piece of thing for perpetuity is hard, as well as like hard drive space. So how do you arrive at like the really tough decisions of, let's say, I guess in your case, of what to cut and what to keep?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about this. The content vault specifically, I think you can look at our execution around what's going out with Tangled Shore and with the campaign, and you can say, okay, we looked at what absolutely has to go. Like what has to be, thrown out the back of the airplane in order for the airplane to still be able to fly. And so that's like a pretty, you look at that size of that thing, and none of us are excited about doing any of this work. And I'll say, here's hopefully a thank to a bunch of people that are doing thankless work. The work to remove something is painful, and if you are that person that has to work to remove something, and you know that your thanks on the other side of it is the internet being really mad at you, like, think about those people every day going to work. It's not a fun thing, and it's absolutely essential in our field. So, like, this is the work that has to be done. So what we're then looking at is saying, okay, how can we do this and keep Destiny in the best shape possible? So we look at a bunch of things. We look at one, like, chronological. Does it just make sense, right? Like, if we were to, like, say, oh, Europa's gone, I think people are like, what? Right? Like the thing that you just put in the game, right?
Yeah,
So that's
gone.
like number one.
That's
Right,
okay,
it's
right?
gone.
You don't need that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you can't get
Number
stasis
two.
anymore? Nah, it's fine.
I think then right after that you're gonna look at, okay, now once we do that, how can we, like, tactically take the knife and keep a bunch of the important stuff? So this was like a big thing that we looked at and we said, hey, can we keep the Dreaming City? Can we keep the raid on it? Can we keep the dungeon on it? Right? Can we keep the prison at Elder Strike? Right? Like, there was a bunch of tactical, and then even when we said, hey, this is what it's gonna go, does the game still work without it? Are there still places to find Scorn and Cabal? How does our color palette work from destination to destination? Because, like, the Tangled Shore has this really cool purple color palette. Does that still exist in the game? Yeah, and so a bunch of very smart people, we get into a room and we look at all the the different options for what we're going to get rid of, and what still feels essential to Destiny, I'll say, is the other one, right? We look at something like EDZ and it's like, is Destiny still Destiny if we got rid of all the base Destiny destinations? You always need to be able to go to the EDZ. So yeah, a bunch of those things come into, and then yeah, I just want to, like, thank a bunch of people that do really hard work to get this all to fit, and they do it, and then hopefully we send them on a much more fun mission next time around than that one, because that one's it's really hard work that has to be done, but no one is excited about doing it.
I'll be honest, I actually, not that I'm, like, out here always, like, calling Bungie lazy, but I actually didn't think that removing content from the game would be that hard, so I was ignorant on that completely. I thought that would be one of your easier tasks versus one of your harder ones.
Yeah, just think about how interconnected Destiny is.
It makes
and then
sense
a bunch
when you
of stuff
explain it,
that's just like, no, that's gone. I was like, oh, a bunch of the stuff that, like, we had to refix those links, right?
Okay, so this is another question that's more about, I think, maybe fleshing out, I guess for you, more about what you don't do. But people want, there's a lot of conversations right now about the pricing behind Destiny content. Is that something in your purview? Do you have any influence over, like, what the price of DLC, MTX, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'll say that, a part of my job that we don't talk a lot about here, and I think we're gonna talk about what I do and not necessarily how we do it, is, yeah, you can't do this job and not be involved with publishing and marketing in the business of the game.
Interesting.
Right? In a lot of ways, that's like, makes it hard to sleep at night. You're like, hey, a bunch of people get paid because of this, and if we don't do the right things, like, that's them not getting paid, right? That's like us having to lay people off. That's like a bunch of really not fun decisions, and so we take the responsibility of the Destiny business, like, super seriously, and making sure we're doing right by our employees and making sure we're that there's always going to be a place to go. And I think that's not just for the employees, it's also for the game itself, right? It's for, like, hey, we want to keep making this game, we want to keep making more content, we want to keep pushing stuff out. So a bunch of those things is about how are we making a game that's going to be able to provide the ability for us to do that in the future. I think anyone that is in this job and shirkens that responsibility is going to start making a thing that's pretty disjointed, and the wheels are going to fall off the car.
I don't know why I never thought that, like, you would be a director of any video game wouldn't be, like, kind of in with publishing and stuff like that. That makes a lot. I guess that clears up things for me as well. Once again, I have so many misconceptions over game dev, just because, like I said, we don't really talk about this stuff very much, and so it's kind of a breath of fresh air to have some level of ignorance, like, removed from my brain, just because I don't know stuff.
Yeah, and I'll say some stuff here, right? Like, you don't want me being the person that's writing the marketing playbook, right? Like
Well, it's
you
not your
don't
job,
want,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, you don't want, in the same way you don't want me to be the person that builds a SKU plan out for like what the next Destiny release
the
looks
same
like.
reason you don't want me being the person who tells you where to put the money in Destiny, because I would just say it's all going to raiding, cut out everything else, planets gone,
Yeah.
only raids.
Yeah, and so I think that I try to a term that we use at Bungie a lot is like expert inputter or agreeer, right? And there's a bunch of these roles, you're not the decider, but you're trying to give input like, hey, I see what you're trying to do here. Have you thought about these things? Or when you're more in the agreeer role, someone presents a plan and you're like, you might not be deciding, but you are the person that says, yep, I agree, this is the right thing to do, right? And like I've totally been convinced by your plan.
This is, I think, a great question. Do you feel that time away from one company and then returning to it, or even just leaving a company to work somewhere else, was a very good growing experience?
Yeah, so I'll say I absolutely loved my time at Riot, and I hated being away from my colleagues at Destiny, and I hate being away from my colleagues at Riot, to be honest, right? Like I love a bunch of those people. Um, the One of the biggest advantages is getting to see how a bunch of different people approach similar problems, right? Like similar, hey, a huge team of people trying to make a game, and getting to take some of that and come back and be like, hey, this is how the sausage is made over here, and like, yeah, there's some great things I think we can learn. I think anytime you're getting new blood in any sort of ecosystem, you want to be able to take some of the learnings. I think every good developer, every good person in their career is to just be a sponge for all the good around them, right? And eventually you repeat that and people think that you came up with it, but you basically came up with none of it, right? Like it's just a, hey, I just try to take the top 10% of smart things other people say and just turn that into my personality, right? Like, and then someone else is doing that with me, and they're, eventually we all get better and smarter about the things that we're making.
This is a very important question as well. How does it feel to have such a damn beautiful mustache? That was from Pitch Black Void on Twitter.
Oh, thank you, Pitch. Here's the thing I'll say. I started doing in like 2019. Every so often, I would like do the mustache for a little bit, and in 2019, people were like, "That's disgusting. I hate it." And I was like, "It's okay. I'm just Goose for Halloween. Like, it's fine." And then slowly, as I kept doing it, it's like become more and more culturally acceptable as time goes on. And so I'm gonna ride the mustache wave for a little bit. I'll say I had a beard
It's a
up
very
until
odd way of
recently.
phrasing it. I don't know if I would have said those words, but that's fair.
We're doing the best we can. Yeah, I'm joining what I believe will be the legions of people that are dressing up as Ted Lasso for Halloween. So I'm just sort of gonna fall into that. Let's not talk about any major people that might have done it recently. But yeah, I believe I've never dressed up as what I believe the hot Halloween costume will be for the year.
Are you doing it
But I
this year?
believe I believe that I'm going to be the most popular Halloween costume. If you're like, well, what are people dressing up
that
as?
I don't believe. The most popular one is gonna be Squid Game, and you know it. Don't even
Oh,
play.
okay.
Like,
Okay. Yeah.
if enough brands on Twitter are tweeting about it, that is the thing that's gonna happen. Like, I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy one to be able to make, because you could dress up as a bunch of different people from Squid Game.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty low budget and turn out with a pretty high quality result.
Exactly. So this is something I definitely could have asked earlier. But what is your favorite thing you've ever made in your career? Or a favorite if you have lots.
Yeah, that's really hard.
I'm the same way. Whenever someone asks me a very pointed, like, what's your favorite moment? Like, what's your favorite exotic gun? I'm like, it's Telesto. And it's like, oh, of course, it's memer. And then they make fun of you. I freeze because, like, I just don't typically have, like, favorites. I just have, like, a large catalog of things I really, really enjoy.
I'm gonna go back to one of my favorite things that we ever did. When we were closing Forsaken, and I've talked about this before, but we started this practice where we realized it was so hard to predict what was going to happen with the game. So we make games that we hope that our audience wants to play for a bunch of hours. Like, was one of the things we find out about Destiny is that people want to play it as a hobby. They want to keep playing it every day. When there's not enough to do, they're like, hey, like, I like football, but you suddenly stopped airing football. Like, please start airing football again, right? And so it's our sort of responsibility to make a game that, like, this is your hobby, if this is where you hang out, there's always something to do. Well, the challenge with making a video game like that is you can't just be like, hey, we're done with the product. I guess we'll just play it internally for 6 months and then see if it works. And we didn't have a good practice for how we did this. So at the end of Forsaken, we did a thing that we called Cade to Raid, which was like, it was the from the very first part of the game, you know, where Cade dies, spoilers, sorry, go play Forsaken, it's going to be free soon, to the raid, right, to Last Wish. And we wanted to play everything in there. And particularly it was important because this is when we did a bunch of the milestone system and for, you know, getting powerful rewards. And it was a thing that we just needed to play a lot of. And so we established this practice of taking 20 people offline from Bungie. And some of these people are very well paid engineers. They're important leaders in the team, but they're also the like 20 people that we think, hey, these people like bleed Destiny. And so we're just going to have them play the shit out of the game for 2 weeks. And some people will be getting new builds and restarting, but we're trying to simulate like, hey, what does the game feel like when you're playing it for 8 hours for a day, right? Together. And that's become part of the way that we think about making the games now. That every time that we get to a big release, we have a thing, right? Like for Beyond Light, it was called Frost to Boss, right? And so there's always also this thing now. It's like, okay, what is your
Frost to Boss?
Yeah, what's your here's the interesting thing for Nova. I won't reveal what ours is called for Nova. Or sorry, I said Nova 1,000 times.
Swamp to Savathun.
For Witch Queen, right? I won't reveal what our thing is called. But
according to Holtzman, Shadowkeep was Sleep to Keep, so that's good.
Yeah, and so what is you know, there's always a big debate on what it should be called now, and it has to have a good rhyme, it has to be snappy, and it has to describe the beginning to end of the game.
Gotcha. Totally understand. Okay, so another question where is it? This is why I probably should have put these in like a notepad versus just scrolling.
Oh wait, I have to clarify because I looked over and made the mistake and saw chat. Sorry, Nova is not.
I probably should have warned you not to like ever look over there. Like,
yeah, I shouldn't have. But someone's gonna be like tweeting this. Nova is not some like crazy new thing. We just have code names for projects. So yeah, Nova is our internal name for the Witch Queen, right?
Oh, what's your favorite internal silly name for something?
I'm gonna say my least favorite. No, I'm gonna say both of them.
I'll do the opposite of what you asked, actually.
Yeah, my least favorite was we called Kingsfall Epiphany, which having to spell Epiphany in every one of your check-ins is a nightmare. And my most favorite was when we did Wrath. The code name for Wrath of the Machine was Promise, and a lot of it like, you know, we'll choose a code word that has something to do with it. We've stopped that because it's like actually a pretty bad practice for security reasons. But we only called it Promise because we promised we could make the raid on time. That's what the code name of that release. So we just called it Promise.
That reminds me of the old story I heard about when you were first making supers for Destiny 1, and how when you got your super, maybe it was Destiny 2. Either way, there was a moment in time where it would flash on your screen, it would say super ready. And so people would start joking, saying, I'm super ready, like as if they're really excited versus like their super ability is able to be used. And so they had to change it. Oh, man, I would have loved to meme on that so hard. So good. Okay. So this is something that's been kind of burning in my head about how Bungie or other, even like your experience at Riot may inform this decision too. How much is watchability and discussion level content like informing how you make games now? Because now we have new media versus, you know, back when N64 was out, like you didn't have Let's Players and all the stuff that was informing your game design because it wasn't part of like the community aspect. But now you have YouTube, you have Twitch. How much does the YouTube environment or the Twitch environment inform game design?
I think in a lot of ways it has become a major a supplement to like traditionally the jobs that has only been done by games journalists, right? Is there's hey, you're gonna have a thing, and there's not a lot of people giving a public opinion about a thing, right? So you would pick up your Nintendo Power and you'd be like, Nintendo Power, that's an unbiased source for reviews, and you'd scroll to the back and you'd be like, they give Mario 5 stars again. It's a
That's
great game.
crazy. Who would have thought Nintendo Power would give Nintendo first-party products good rating?
And I think an interesting thing now is that you have the way that a person on Twitch or a person on YouTube may evaluate a game is sometimes different than a way a games critic might evaluate a game, right? And they could be evaluating for totally different things. I'll say like a bunch of live service games that might have really long beta windows, really long early access windows. There's people aren't looking at the review on IGN for if they should play that. They're saying, are a bunch of people playing this on Twitch? Is there a cool YouTube video about it? Let's see what people are saying about it. And so I think especially in the live service world, like the content creators, they carry a bunch of weight in that, and they are also a great way for people to get exposure. I'll talk about this from the audience side. We just expect a higher degree of knowledge with the people that are passionate about our game, because it's so easy to go out and learn stuff. You played World of Warcraft 15 years ago. It's pretty hard to understand what the meta was in World of Warcraft. You went onto some really gross websites, and then there were some forums where people were just really hateful to each other, and you were like, let me try to parse some of this out. You couldn't go to YouTube, right? Like I always think about oh my god, how is World of Warcraft older than YouTube? You couldn't go to YouTube and be like, I want a guide on this. And the early World of Warcraft YouTube videos are drama-filled PvP videos. It was no one that was explaining to you the rotation of a druid. And so now it also really elevates the floor of our regular community. We expect them to know what the good builds are pretty quickly. They go out there, they get perversed.
Then this would be my follow-up question then. Does the rapid dissemination of information, so in the case of, let's say, Destiny, does a well-known content creator bringing to light a meta level combination of weapons and armor and stuff, is that something that how does that interact with game design, I guess is what I want to ask.
I mean, I think there are two things here. One, it might mean that there's a broader amount of your community that's exposed to the higher skill band of your game, right? And so that could further separate what might be someone that just picked up the game or just saw it on Steam and got it in playing, and their experience in a Lost Sector versus your experience in a Lost Sector, someone that has watched a video of yours and picked up a strategy. The challenge is always making the game that works for both of them, right? And as people start to creep further and further away, and you're as you walk into Gambit and someone's like, look at all this stuff I can do, and they're like, I've got a blue auto rifle. There's two very different experiences. But I think on the flip side, what the positive for us is it's a really rapid way for the design team to get a pulse on where the community is at, and also for people in the community sphere to be able to look at a thing and be like, okay, someone just posted this exploit and it has 2 million views on YouTube. That's about how widespread it is before we go investigate, right? You can just look at those things and understand how quickly some of that knowledge is traveling.
All right, hand check.
Hand check.
Okay, he's not
hand
playing.
check.
We had to make sure he's not playing.
Okay.
He's not playing Witch Queen. Okay. Then I guess another follow-up question would be, does the widespread, so let's say in the case of an exploit, does public knowledge of problem that is, let's say, we used the terminology from earlier, a bruise, a cut, a bleeding, does that change the type of response you may give to a specific problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, one of the qualities of if it's a bruise, if it's a cut, if it's bleeding, is how much of the game it's affecting, right? You can have in a way that we have to prioritize our time a bunch, right? Hey, what's going to get out in this next release? What are we calling people in at, a bad hour to fix because it's that critical? If it's something that's hitting a lot of people, right? That quickly escalates to a really top tier issue. So yeah, I think it's a huge amount. We've had some things that are like in the game and that we're going to fix them in a later vehicle. We know about them and we feel okay about them because, okay, this is about how much of the community is here, right? This is not a thing that we would quote unquote pull heroics for. And I'll say that as like, I know the internet's like, you should pull heroics all the time. And I'm like, we shouldn't, right? Like people need to see their families, right? Like the people need work-life balance. If we don't give that to them, like that, first of all, it makes Bungie a really shitty place to work, and it's going to make them not want to work in the industry anymore, right? And so we have to be
Burnout
really careful.
Real, man. It
yeah.
is real.
Yep. And so there's a bunch of tricky calls, but absolutely how widespread is something. And I think we would have so many things that wouldn't, like if you deleted YouTube and Twitch, so much of like the way Destiny is played would be totally different.
I would agree.
Be a totally different game.
And I think it'd be almost a different entire game, just because I feel like of how the Destiny community has grown, like with how they interact with each other is so heavily influenced by just all forms of new media, whether it's Reddit, Twitch, YouTube, your own Bungie streams, stuff like that. It's just a very different environment to be in. So we are, man, it's already time's almost over. I hate it. It's just because I have like so many more questions I would love to ask, but we are running low. So we have 3 minutes left, chat. Is there anything, Joe, that you want to say to the community that you are a part of, or anything like that, or you have any final words before we start signing off?
I mean, I'll say we're eternally really grateful for what a great community we have, and that's not just like me trying to butter people up. I think that we take pride in the fact that Destiny, for as big of an online game it is, our players are pretty good to each other overall, and that's like a thing that we really enjoy to see. I really hope that like learning some more about this can help someone get a career in games. I think that it's a thing that can feel impenetrable from the outside. It's a thing that I hope that we can make more and more easy to understand, and give a bunch of people the context for what goes on into making this, because I think it just makes everyone a little bit smarter. Mm-hmm. And I certainly wish I'd had more of it 10 years ago and earlier, right? And there just weren't a lot of these resources. So I appreciate you doing this too. I think you're hopefully spreading some knowledge.
I hope so too. I mean, because I am also attempting to like learn more about the games industry, because I do want to do more work in it. I won't lie. I applied to Bungie. There's some things I'm interested with what you're all doing and what other companies are doing, because I'm passionate about streaming, but I love games, and I want to do more. So I don't plan on stopping streaming or anything like that, but I'm ready for like another challenge, if that makes sense.
Okay, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Because here's gonna be my thing. If you are interested in a career in games, I think one of the things that you should be most aware of, just be careful with what you say online. Like, just be smart about it. Because I think one of the things that can really shoot people in the foot is they'll be like, oh, I really want to work on this thing. And it's so easy for someone to go back and be like, put your name in Google, get to your Twitter handle, and see like the super shitty things that you said to a Respawn dev. And they're like, not so sure, right? Like, I think it's so important that we're kind to each other. I certainly hope we teach our devs to be kind to our community and back and forth. And all of that, like at the end of the day, you got to do what's right for you. But my warning is, one of the worst parts about the internet, it is permanent. So be aware that like if you want a career in here, just be mindful of what you're saying.
I mean, the one thing I've learned too is the games industry is small. It is much smaller than you think. People talk. Like, it is very easy to have your name come out of someone's mouth who you've never met if you are known as someone less than reputable. Let's just say notorious, right? Let's just use that word.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, this is not a thing to be like, oh my god, I said one stupid thing one time, someone's gonna track this down.
I said
like,
fuck. Ah, shit!
Yeah. I think watch your current attitude, right? People are not going to go deep diving. Just try to be, try to be respectful out there. People want to work with people that are respectful.
All right, so we are going to be ending here shortly, chat. I just want to thank you again, Joe, for coming on. Like, it means a lot to me. I'm very happy that you made the time. Obviously, I can't pay you what you're worth for being here, but we have go ahead and made a $250 donation to the Bungie Foundation in your honor, Joe. So thank you for being here. That's the little bit that I can do. Chat, I would recommend, if you want to share to support, Bungie Foundation's fantastic. All the work they do with like direct relief now, especially, very, very pertinent. Very great. So we're gonna be done. We're gonna kick back to the screen we had before, because I have a contractual obligation to run a specific amount of ads. I tried to have it at the beginning and at the end. That way nothing was ruined in the middle. So we'll see you next week, chat. If you want to see more from Joe, play Destiny 2, or you can go to his Twitter handle @Jogaroth, and you could tweet him questions that he, probably won't answer, just like you did today. It's great. You get the same experience, except you're tweeting directly at him. So thank you for joining us. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Steve.